Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com, a Paramount podcast. I am Mike Casazza, joined as always by Chris Anderson. Chris, it's Monday morning, entering, just about the 2 week mark of camp. It's the third calendar week. A lot of football going on in public, behind closed doors. Uh, Irresponsible of you and me right now not to have this whole thing figured out, right? I mean, we already know what's going to happen. Spoiler alert coming up, right?
That's right. Fall camp's over. We got it figured out. Preseason practice. And this when we're supposed to be transitioning from fall camp into preseason practice or whatever arbitrary date line they put on in here for before the year starts. But I think we got most of it figured out, right?
I'm through non-conference play in my head already. I'm just trying to figure out the Big 12 at this point. So far so good,
You just
which
you
is
just
kind of why we're
wait
here
until
today,
my
right?
first one. Yeah, you just
Yep.
wait till my first one. Just wait.
Okay, kind of why we're here. They had this line in the sand drawn pretty much based on Saturday. They had a not scrimmage on Tuesday live in the stadium, and they kind of said they were going to have 4 hard days once they came back from Thursday's off day. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday. So coming up, we're like right in the middle of this thick part where things begin to, I would think, come into focus. You kind of have your feet in the wet cement, and now you pull them out, and things are really starting to solidify when it comes to really, Chris, like that August 21st date, which is not imminent, but is here sooner than you think. And once they pause, start the semester, and then I think any coach will tell you that once that semester starts and you are filled with distractions on campus, your friends are back, you're going to class, you got homework, you're in your dorm, you're in your apartment. Like there's all these new things that have not been there for 3 weeks of football at West Virginia. If you haven't figured out who and what you have by that point, kind of lost. And you have little time and little room for surprises or developments. You really have to hit the ground running because 3 weeks to get a lot of work done to get to that point. You have 10 days until Penn State comes to town. So this is just kind of like the straightaway, Chris, to borrow the Olympics here. They've run the 200. They've rounded that corner right now, and they're kind of on that home stretch here. So what better time to jump to conclusions? Let's just bypass that home stretch and get to the finishing flourish right now. What do we have as far as impressions or thoughts? I don't know, even predictions.
Is it is this backstretch? Is this right before the finish line instead of leaning forward to get my chest and shoulders over the line? Can I backflip and flip flop on an earlier thought about this program? Is it too early or too late for that?
So are you going from gold to bronze or gold off the podium? Because I like all of your preseason predictions. They were all perfect.
I don't know about so much predictions, but my thoughts on here's a couple position groups, and we talked about it during preseason. We said, what's the big concern here? And I think we said, hey, cornerback seems pretty obvious
Yeah.
because Malachi Ruffin, Beanie Bishop, both gone. They took up 95% of the snaps, brought in a bunch of guys, don't know what's going on. And I said, if it's not that, for me personally, it's linebacker. I don't want to say I'm not worried about both of those spots now because that might be a little too extreme. But can I say I feel better about them, cautiously optimistic about them, or suspiciously optimistic about them?
You
And
can, but you're going to have to explain yourself,
yeah,
especially when it comes to the use of the word suspiciously. That got me thinking, Chris. Fingers on temple when you say the word suspiciously. Why are you suspiciously changing your mind here, or talking yourself into something that maybe others agree with, but perhaps they have not to up to this point?
yeah, as I say, I think maybe that's it. The latter way you put it there of maybe, I didn't believe what others have tried to convince me to believe. And then some things I've seen and heard, maybe it might be slightly changing my mind. Because again, you look at corner and you look at linebacker and you listen to what the coaches say. And so much of this preseason talk, I don't want to say it's useless because a lot of it's just kind of middle of the road. I don't want to say anything too extreme. This is too good. This is amazing. This is but spot's terrible. So they kind of just right down the middle for a lot of positions, a lot of players. I have noticed from what Neil Brown has said and what some of the assistant coaches have said, that they're not playing it right down the middle with those two positions in particular. They are confident in them. Neil Brown took a couple minutes during his press conference to say Garnett Hollis is the real deal. Aiden Garnes is, I think he said he was a little skinny, but he's the real deal. Um, I was kind of stunned to see them just blatantly say these two guys are starters. Um, I thought there'd be a little bit more of the or maybe, or guys are pushing. They feel confident in saying those two guys are starting. And then in linebacker, um, how was it, Jordan Leslie, or I believe it was Jordan Leslie, who said this is the best and deepest linebacker group they've had since he's been here, which I just, these guys don't say these things lightly. And I'm trying to remember what it was that you and I talked about this last year, where the coaches don't just come out and say this kind of stuff in preseason and don't mean it. And I feel like maybe there's a little more to this linebacker room and a little more to this cornerback room than maybe I'm giving them credit for. Maybe I'm not ready to completely flip flop on it, but maybe they're talking me into it. Mike, are you with me? Have you always been with them, the coaches, on this? Or where are you on this?
Chris, what is your favorite Pauly Shore movie?
Biodome. I answered that way
Okay,
too quickly.
good answer. That's concerning that you actually have one. But like your favorite Pauly Shore movie, your deepest linebacker room, you
Yeah.
really have a small group that you're picking from. So I don't want to hand out prizes for default purposes. That said, I think you'd have a hard time disagreeing with what they said. And also, I think if you check back in, they've been working in this linebacker room for 3 years, right? When you kind of recruiting and then having the players on campus and developing them. If you came back in 3 years, you have a good chance of this still having that superlative. So that's okay. So I'm with you on that. I do think that Trotter's the real deal. I think he'll start. I think Lathan will start. I think you're perfectly fine with Cutter and Carrico as backups. And if your backups, Chris, are a guy who was a high level recruit to Ohio State and golly couldn't get on the field at Ohio State, okay, you still have something to work with there. And if your other backup is a guy who played as a true freshman and had moments, both good and bad, but if you're expecting Ben Cutter to be all conference as a true freshman thrown in the fire, that's not fair. Can you grow with a guy who has Power Five Ohio State pedigree and a guy who was a tackle machine in high school in Cutter and had his moments? Can you grow with that as backups? Yeah, that's okay. And if your starters are a guy like Lathan, who was a revelation last year, and a guy like Trotter, who has uber pedigree, I think you're in a good spot there. And if your backups are Caden Beiser and maybe one or two freshmen, I think you're okay there too. So I don't have a problem with that statement being out there because one, it's true. And two, even if you weren't picking your favorite Pauly Shore movie, if you were picking your favorite Chris Farley movie, you'd have a good case for this, I think, right? So I think that's okay for that one there. I don't think that's crazy, Chris. I think I buy that because it's okay. And again, if you compare to last year, would you feel better starting off Lee Koba, who had some limitations, I think we can agree,
Yeah.
and Trey Lathan, or Jeremiah Trotter and also Trey Lathan? I think I would maybe take Trotter and Lathan just because Lathan's a little bit further along. You didn't know what you had with Lathan last year. You don't know what you have with Trotter. You kind of know what you have with Lathan. You don't. I think Koba was going to be good and probably played to his ceiling last year, but I'm not sure what the trade-off is. And then when you back it up with a little bit more depth and someone who could push you for a starting spot or who could come in and play if you stink, if you're injured, if you need a blow, I think it's a pretty valid point to make right now. They are in a much better position and that this is serviceable and listen, it needed time to be answered. It was an absolute question you had to ask and observe in camp. I mean, if we're 10 days into this now and you go, okay, case closed, maybe the coaches don't agree. I think 10 days from now, you might say, you know what, 10 days ago, they were right.
Well, do you have any positions or thoughts on this team that maybe are different than they were a couple weeks ago? I've spilled my soul here. I've let it all out. I don't want to say
I
I'm wrong, but
I have two. Let's stick with
uh-huh.
corner just because I think they're in a much better spot than they were last year at this stage. You had no idea with Beanie Bishop. That's a guy who was at two different colleges, played, 4 years and just had kind of a one-off all conference USA selection because he got hot at the end of the schedule, which fine, that happened. But you're looking at a guy who was like what 5'10, 180. Is he going to play? I don't know. And if you're swapping out him and Ruffin, who Ruffin had a perfectly good year last year, but you didn't know. And if you're swapping him with a guy like Garnes, who West Virginia saw, liked last year, and then wanted him in the portal, and you're swapping him with Garnett Hollis, who frankly has a better resume than Beanie Bishop did at this time last year, but also you're bigger, you're faster, you're more experienced there. Again, you had to ask the question, but I think you have answers here. And what's most intriguing to me about corner Chris, but also linebacker to continue this conversation, there have been no developments there. There has been, hey, have you heard about Reed Carrico? Hey, have you heard about Dantes Fagan? Haven't heard that, Chris. You've heard Hollis and Garnes. You've heard Cutter and Lathan. The backups are the backups, which is fine. And if you're in a position like West Virginia where you come to camp and there's not a whole lot of ors or blank spots or question marks in your depth chart, and you flip ahead a couple of pages here we are 10 days into this now, 12 days into this now, I guess, and you don't have any question marks, any open spaces, any developments, that's not bad. That doesn't mean that your depth stinks and you're not pushing your starters. It could very well mean your starters are good and your backups are backups. And I think in both those spots, there's nothing wrong with that. My other one would be receiver. Chris, they are bigger at receiver. Like you can look at Clement, he's just a different body. Fox is a physically mature guy right now. I think that Gallagher's bigger, and that's all just kind of natural. But you throw in players like Justin Robinson and Jaden Bray, and you get a Greg Ross and a Cole Taylor out there. I know they're not receivers, but they are catching passes and lining up. That's just a bigger group, and that's going to help them with Garrett Green because you've talked about this a bunch, Chris. Why are they always making contested catches? Can't get open. And sometimes that's a matter of physicality and force. And I think that's going to help them there. And that should help them in the red zone, whether that's getting open, running routes, being taller, having wingspan, or just being really good blockers at receiver in the slot on the line. I think it's their size at receiver or the receiving positions, the people who catch passes. I'm more convinced about that than I was before.
Now, you know, that was my other position where I was like, hey, watch out. I don't want to say I've come around on that either yet, but think about it this way, to your point. Their top five receivers from last season. Back are the number two, number three, number four, and number five receivers, and presumably better than they were last year. We are going to assume that with an extra year of experience, an extra year in the system, extra year of strength and conditioning, they will be at least marginally better. You're essentially swapping out Devin Carter, who by year's end was, I don't want to
Not
say,
healthy.
and what was that?
Not healthy.
Okay. And not playing much and
No.
not contributing much. But one catch against Cincinnati, nothing after that. So you're swapping out a guy who really wasn't a factor for the last few couple games of the season for Jaden Bray, who is, I would say, a mostly known commodity and is a commodity, can contribute, and Justin Robinson and Day Day Farmer, a freshman that you are expecting or looks like might just have that kind of ability to get on the field. Somebody wrote about that recently. I'll have to go back and read that story. But
You talked about that.
yeah. So I don't know if the wide receiver room was great last year. It had its moments for sure, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. In fact, I'd say it's more likely that it will be better this season than last. And so yeah, maybe things are good. Let me ask you a side question here. Well, true or false?
Yeah.
I had three of them. We'll save the other two for some videos, but um, go ahead and use this one because you mentioned it. There won't be a lot of ors on this depth chart. You feel like these guys are making it clear who the starters are, who the guys being talked about, all that stuff. There were five or um ors on the depth chart for first team in before the season. I will run it back for you. I see you
Good.
thinking it through in your head. Running back, CJ Donaldson or Jaheim White. X receiver, Clement or Bray. Z receiver, Fox or Ray. Nose tackle, Mulba or Russell. And will linebacker, Trotter or Potter. Over, under, or true or false, whatever, however we want to phrase this. Let's go over, under
True.
2.5 ors
Oh,
on the week one depth chart. Hey,
that's the right.
but
That's the right number. That's the right number.
okay, I was gonna say, and let's try to be clear here. Like, sometimes they put or when we all know it's not an or. So let's use our best judgment here. 2.5. What do you got?
I'm gonna go under. I think they'll keep running back as or.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they're going to be, as I believe they have been, as productive at receiver in camp. They've thrown the ball a lot. They've moved people around. I just think that Ray is going to play, you know, like I said, the alphabet. He's going to play all the positions. So maybe he's not a starter. Maybe he's an or. I don't know, but he can't be or both. I don't think. I mean, I guess they could. He is right now, but that'd be hard for me to accept. And I just think that he's been good enough from everything I've seen and heard that he'll be one of those guys. And if it's him and Clement, that would make a lot of sense to me.
Oh,
However,
excuse me. Yeah, it was Clement and Bray or Fox or
okay,
Ray. Sorry, I didn't
okay.
mean Ray. I didn't mean Ray twice.
Look, I think you're going to see Clement and Fox start, and I
Okay.
think Ray might be your slot guy to start, and that might not even be a depth chart thing. But if they're in 10 personnel, I might see Ray in the slot just because I think that gives you your best combination of five skill players out there, unless they start with two running backs, which I wouldn't discount that possibility based on things we've heard lately too. The ones that are curious to me, Chris, like I just don't believe they're going to have an or at linebacker. Um, I know that they like Russell a lot. I just think Moba's been very good so far. I wonder though, Chris, if my two would be ruined by an off the board or I have no idea what they're doing at Cat.
Oh,
Just
oh, excuse
that's
me. Excuse me. Oh, I screwed that up. It was 6. It was 6. I forgot all about that. So
come
let's
on.
bump it up to 3.5. Let's bump it up to 3.5.
Well, there goes my theory. Was that one of the six then?
That was one of the 6. Yeah.
So 3.5. I'm still gonna go under. I bet you it's three. I think you're gonna see running back. I think you'll see Cat, and then boy, I can't believe there's gonna be two more there. It wouldn't make sense to me for again the progress I think they're gonna make the 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 scarcity of questions that I think they have, it wouldn't make sense for me to have a quarter of their positions on the depth chart be undecided by the end of this. They're going to play too much football. They're going to tackle too much. They're going to go 11 on 11 too much. And more importantly, they're going to be serious enough getting to that August 21 first that they're not going to want to have those unknowns and those 50-50 timeshares late in the camp. I just don't think they're going to want to go into that. So I'm going to say under. And you
Okay.
probably root for under too if you're a West Virginia fan, because again, it'd be great to have that type of competition. You can have competition without the oars too.
Follow up. You said you don't know what they're doing at Cat. Day 12 of fall camp. Do they being the coaches, know what they're doing at Cat yet?
Yeah, don't tell anybody this. They're smarter than me. They have a plan there, and we've seen Jaheim Joseph come in. I didn't see as much of Josiah Jackson the other day. You've tiptoed around this and actually stated it before. They're pretty high on Joseph, and they wish that he was healthier in the spring. And you can fill in the blanks some of this, Chris, because it's your reporting and not mine. But it just seemed like a matter of time for him. They do like Jackson though too, but also like Burks. If Zay Jennings is having a really good camp, and I'm not sure he will, but does that move Burks back there? Because then if you listen to Shadon Brown, he wants to have his best combination of five too, just like your five skill position players on offense, just like your best five offensive linemen. The two corners are going to be fine. Like they're going to be Garnes and Hollis, but maybe somebody sneaks in. But your corners are your corners. They have some flexibility at safety. Wilson to be one of them. Could it be Burks at Cat and Jennings at safety? Excuse me, at Spear. Could it be Burks at Spear? I think so. But is it then definitely Joseph? Could Josiah Jackson have a comeback? Did he just have a day off to the side because that's the way they planned it? Again, they know what they're doing there. I, however, have not, I haven't like used the decoder ring and tried to figure out what they're doing. They have something going on there, but I haven't seen enough yet to know the answer. Give me time, maybe, but it's also productive too. Like they need to see both those guys. More importantly, if they really want to get Joseph on the field too, be surprised if it's not him. But if it's not him, that means Jackson's probably held up his end of the deal here.
Yeah, I think I wasn't trying to imply they didn't know what they were doing. I meant, do we think they have an answer yet? Like, is there a clear cut standard? And I don't know. I guess from reading what you put out there for the practice reports and the message board updates on the board, again, Joseph Jackson. And did we get a clarification on the pronunciation of Kakura's name?
KK,
Kakur, huh? KK.
KK,
Got
good
it.
enough.
Good enough for me. Um, yeah, going to be interesting back there. But I think if that's and I would say it is probably right now the biggest question mark of what's going to happen now, like who's going to start, where's going to go, things might be okay on defense. if that's your, hey, got a couple options at cat, what should you do? So
I
not
think
bad.
what you'll probably see though is that if they have to go to a backup cat against Penn State, and this will differ from opponent to opponent, I wonder if they'll put the backup in Joseph or Jackson, or if they move Burks back. And against Penn State, like they're going to be big and they're going to run the ball. Would you put Lathan at the extra linebacker spot and have Cutter, Trotter, Lathan, or Carrico, Trotter, Lathan to be bigger, go against that 12 personnel or like the formations that you can expect with their power running. Trouble is, guys, what is Cottle Nicky going to do with that Penn State offense? It's not going to be the offense I saw last year. So they probably will have a plan for that to use Burks and their linebacker depth to their best advantage, which works perfectly for what we're talking about right now. They might not know until 2 or 3 series in, or maybe the first, second quarter break.
Do you want to shift gears to basketball, or you got anything else for fall camp right now?
Coaches seem pretty convicted, don't you think? Like
Mhm.
I've said this before. Like sometimes I wonder with their proclamations, sometimes it seemed a little bit like it was made for bumper stickers or t-shirts, and I wasn't really sure who they were trying to convince. If they were trying to convince, themselves or someone else, and it felt like hyperbolic or exaggerated or like pie in the sky stuff. I don't get any of that now. Like if you listen to these head coaches, they're just speaking from facts, which is this team does have experience. This team has depth. This team has leadership. This team achieved this, produced this, finished with these stats last year. And again, when you win and you have success, it's much easier to draw upon that to make your points when you're not confronted with the reality of losing seasons or missing bowl games or player turnover or young rosters or inexperienced rosters. So some of this is just the evolution of their program and like again how they willed it into this existence with their success. But it's nevertheless like striking to me that it's top down, it's Brown, it's coordinators, it's players, but like it's understated, it's confident, and I think in some regard that's like why it's interesting to see as much live football as you have, Chris, because what you see is what you've heard. And those are matching up, which again, I think is a pretty good sign for things. Like you believe what they're saying because you're seeing it out there, which is a difference.
All right, let's flip it over to basketball here. Um, 3 games, 3 blowout victories in Italy. Was there anything? I mean, and again, we talked about this. They have tried to show us some clips. They've sent out the press releases with some of the stats and some quotes from Darren DeVries. Is there anything we can truly take from this? Because this is like opposite of what you just said right there. For football, they're saying things and you can back it up with your own eyes because you're seeing live football. You're seeing it actually happen. Basketball, they're saying things. We're getting a couple edited clips on Twitter. What do we take from this? Anything at all?
Do you think which team, Chris, faced better competition on their international tour? West Virginia or George Mason?
See, I was going to say the men's basketball team or the women's basketball teams because I saw some of those scores as well. It was like 100 and something to 20. So
You saw the George Mason
37.
story, right?
I saw it being talked about on our board. Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, I
Someone's
did.
getting fired for that one. I think it's just good to get out there and do this. There's this like campfire aspect to this where this team had to just be around each other away from basketball and all these new faces and it's hard to manufacture that. Does it require an overseas trip? Probably not, but I don't know. You could go like zip lining in like Fayette County. You could jump off the New River Gorge Bridge or something like that together. You can go whitewater rafting. You could do stuff like that here, I guess. But they had to have this like team building, get to know each other stuff that isn't basketball. And they've been going pretty hard in basketball for what 8 weeks now to get out there and to put practice to use to get to know each other, and then to say, wait a second, we were going against each other and I didn't like this guy or I was getting the better of him or I didn't think he could do this or I thought he could do that. You know this, Chris. It gets difficult when you're doing it against one another over and over and over, and it probably gets stale. And you probably don't like people after a while, or you just get tired of them. And you want to see new stuff. Like that's cliche, but it's just fun to go against somebody else and to go out there and just bludgeon people while you're on
Oh, did you
vacation.
have to use that word right after the Appalachian State thing?
Sorry
Did
for
you see
that.
that one?
Yeah.
You immediately got me thinking about that. About you get frustrated playing against your own teammates over and over and over again during preseason practice.
My
And then
bad.
there's that video of the Appalachian State defensive lineman ripping off the offensive lineman's helmet. And to borrow a phrase from Mike here, bludgeoned him in the head. So go ahead, go on, continue.
Um, yeah, to just to go out and have fun on the court and also off the court. It's kind of what you want. It's ROI and it's hard to just get that. You can't like open a bottle and drink that elixir. You got to go out and do stuff like that. And again, it's corny, it's cliche, it's trite. I understand that. It has to happen though. And if that's happening now, just think about how much further they'll be along the next time they get out there. And they might have one or two more players by the time that they get to do this again in a couple of weeks when the fall campus is back in action. They actually start their practices. Um, it's I don't know. I think it can be overstated sometimes for veteran teams that might have benefits, but for a young team like this kind of had to happen. It probably accelerates their development a little bit. They have confidence. And the first time they go out there for like an exhibition, Chris, they're gonna have answers that they didn't have before. That's the benefit of these tours. Like when you roll it out the first time against like your Division 2 opponent, you're still gonna win, but it's gonna be choppy and you're not gonna know. And like they're gonna be that much further ahead when they actually have that game. So just think about like press and fast forward and that's what they've done. So by the time they hit their Division 2, their preseason exhibition game, that closed secret scrimmage and all that, they're going to be better off, and they'll learn from that as opposed to starting at that point and going forward. And I think for like this embryonic stage, and that's darn near priceless. I think there's a price tag on it. Don't get me wrong, but it's a really important thing they had to do, and they got it done. And they've been planning this trip for 3 years now, Chris, too. So they
Yeah.
finally cashed that check.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the most important thing about this entire trip was everything that happened off the court.
Mm.
So seeing all that stuff is what it is. But let me put on the traditional WVU panic hat for a moment. Just something to read way too much into it, like way too far. And I'm curious again. We'll never know because I haven't seen it. But pulling it up here, I was trying to do the math real quick. But first game, first quarter, 3-point game. Second game, 10-point game. Third game, I believe it was like a 10-point game as well. And they end up winning all these games. The first game they won by 25, and I think the next two they won by 45 and 50. So 54. Is there anything at all to take away from the fact that all three games started off slow in that first quarter, that these teams who were obviously overmatched were right there, maybe not step for step with WVU in the first quarter, but close to it, reasonably close to it.
Let me give you an answer and an angle here too. First game, travel, time difference, new.
Yeah,
That might happen. That might happen. And I think that there's reluctance to be the guy or to put your foot in the accelerator or do something there going to um that's going to start this on the wrong foot. But they get out of that. Fine. Couple days pass, second game, new starting five, Chris. That's probably going to be a little bit bumpy too, which is fine. But that's the purpose of this. You want to develop and try new things. Third game, Chris. Um, I think it was the first starting five again. And if not, it was most of it. Hey, let's get the ball to Tucker. And that worked out really well. He had, I think, Chris, 50 points in the first like 3 minutes. I might be wrong there.
somewhere
Um,
around that. Yeah.
yeah, he was shooting and scoring, and it sounded like it was efficient. And that's intriguing to me because that's where this team is going to go. That's how this team is going to go. I think that's their best player. That's their best piece on offense. That's how their offense should at least operate. I'm not saying he has to score all the time, but the ball's going to be in his hands a lot, and he's going to make things happen, whether with a shot, an assist, a hockey assist, whatever you want to call it. But that was interesting to me. Like I can understand the first two being choppy, but when they got that first five on the floor to start a game the second time, just in case of emergency, whatever you want to call it, they chose the path of least resistance, and getting Tucker is involved is important, obviously, and they made no bones about that. Just like, hey, he's pretty good. Let's get in the ball, and that one took off from there.
Yeah. I say I'm not actually in panic mode. This was just
Good.
again, we were all in agreement that this trip is what it is. There's not only so much you can take from it, but I did go, huh. Every time a tweet came by was, hey, first quarter, WVU's up 3. Wait, what? Because yeah,
Wow.
get the actual numbers, it was they were winning by 3 in the first game, won by 25, winning by 7 in the second game, won by 44, winning by 10 in the third game, which, as you noted, DeVry Tucker had 19 in the first quarter, and they won by 54. So obviously things ended well in all of these games. It just caught my attention that in all three contests, things were slightly tighter in the first quarter. So,
Big takeaway from me was Jonathan Powell too.
mm,
Again, not seeing the game, never even saw a box score, Chris, but just the stats, some of the things that you saw from highlights, whatever. It seemed like he was involved. And I know that we've talked a lot about KJ Tenner, who had an injury and didn't play the last two games, just precautionary. I don't think he played the third game. I know he didn't play the second game. He played the first. Um, that's been the freshman you talked about a bunch because one, when the media was there, he was so clearly important that you thought they had something. And you didn't see a whole lot of Powell. Powell couldn't miss. It looked like in Italy, like he was aggressive. He took shots. He made shots. I'm not sure like what his like shooting stats were, but he scored a lot of points. He made a bunch of threes, and he's not scared. That's the one thing that they said about him. We actually did talk to the players and the coaches. He's not scared. He's going to fit in, and again, for him to do that out there, he doesn't have to answer that question when they play the secret scrimmage and they play their exhibition game. And that's the personification why these trips are important too. Is he's further ahead than he otherwise would be.
um, well, now I guess they'll return back home. Looks like they're still finishing out this weekend or finished out this weekend with a couple days of leisure on this trip. Come back home, maybe just surprisingly sign an extra player or two, and then get back to preseason practice. Does that sound like a good schedule to you?
Yeah, they got a coaching staff now, right?
Yeah.
Actually did go on the tour this year. Um, what could possibly go wrong at this point?
Yep. It's all gravy from here.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yep.
Chris, speaking of gravy, the cherry on top of this, wrap it up. Um, Practice this week, things going on. Football continues. Again, pretty important 2 days here coming up. We'll speak to players and coaches during the week, have you covered on the website, answer all the important questions, like why your favorite tight end isn't in the video game. Got you covered. You ask, we will ask. Until then, I'm Mike Casazzo.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.